and then one on a separate subject, if I may. Given how little was known about this object at the time that our forces shot it down, is it safe to say that when the president ordered that it be shot down, he did not know whether it was a manned or unmanned object?
We were able to get some fighter aircraft up and around it before the order to shoot it down, and the pilot's assessment was that this was not manned.
On a different subject, after the State of the Union address, minutes after he finished delivering the State of the Union address, President Biden encountered in the halls of the Capitol Brittany Alconus, the wife of your Navy comrade Ridge Alconus, who, as you know, remains imprisoned in Japan. And the president told Mrs. Alconus, "We're going to get this done." I wonder if you can tell us if the Alconus case figured in the conversation that the president had with the Japanese Prime Minister when he visited here last month, and if you can flesh out the president's promise to Mrs. Alconus. I know generally you don't like to say a whole lot about these kinds of efforts, but what can you tell us about what's being done on behalf of Lieutenant Alconus?
I would go back to what I said to you last time, James. I mean, the president's well aware of this case. And he's well aware of what the family's going through. He's also well aware of concerns by the Japanese government with respect to their judicial system. And he's got the team working on this. I'm not going to disclose personal conversations that the president had either with Mrs. Alconus or with Prime Minister Kishida. But he's well aware of it, he's tracking it, and so is the national security team.
Thank you, Karine. Admiral, over here, I wanted to ask you two questions.
I need to watch for her hands.
One on the shoot down that you just described, and the other one on Ukraine. On the incident that happened in the past hour, I wanted to know, is there any line of communication that you can describe that has been ongoing over the course of the past 2 weeks on the diplomatic side of things? I know that the Defense Secretary says that his call to his counterpart was not returned from China. But on the diplomatic side of things, are there lines of communication between the U.S. and China right now?
Well, certainly. Look, we have an embassy in Beijing. Diplomatic discussions routinely happen with Beijing. So, of course, the diplomatic channels remain open. Sadly, the military ones do not appear to be open right now. Secretary Austin made a good faith effort to reach out to his counterpart and was rebuffed, and that's unfortunate, particularly when at times like this you want to keep as open as you can the lines of communication, and the president's committed to that.
And then on Ukraine, President Zelensky was in the UK earlier this week, and he received a promise from the UK government that the UK would train Ukrainian pilots on NATO standard jet fighters. Can you tell me if you think that's a good idea? Is that something that the U.S. is considering in terms of training Ukrainian pilots on NATO aircraft as well?
Well, if they're going to get Western aircraft, then they're going to need to be trained on them.
Does that mean that will happen? They'll get Western aircraft?
That would be up to the nations that may be willing to provide aircraft. I've said it before. Probably tired of me hearing me say it, but these are all sovereign decisions. And if a NATO nation or even a non-NATO nation wants to provide capabilities like fighter aircraft to Ukraine, that's certainly their decision to make. And one would assume that if you're going to introduce a system into a military that they have no experience with, that there's going to have to be some training that goes along with that. We're doing it right now. Fort Sill, Oklahoma. We've got Ukrainian soldiers learning how to use a Patriot battery. Outside of Ukraine, we're helping train them on combined arms maneuver. So it's not unusual to do that if an advanced capability is provided, but that's going to be a national decision.
Thank you, Admiral. Thank you, Corinne. Isn't there a concern that these objects, the object and the balloon, were both discovered when they're already flying over U.S. airspace? Shouldn't they be detected before they enter the U.S.?
I think we're going to continue to learn a lot about how these things are or can be detected in a better way. You heard the NORTHCOM commander talk about certain gaps that he felt he had in his domain awareness. So from this incident last week, we'll certainly learn about the capabilities of that surveillance asset, but we also expect to learn more about our own processes and our own systems for detection and tracking. I don't want to get into exactly how this one was detected, but I can assure you that we're going to continue to try to improve our own knowledge base with respect to these systems.
Just one more quick question on the object. Can you say anything about the proximity of it and its flight path to the sensitive oil fields near Prudhoe Bay? And was there any threat at all at any point to that equipment in that region of Alaska?
I'd refer you to the Pentagon for more detail about the track. Again, this just all happened within the last hour, so I don't know what the proximity was to oil fields. And your second question was?
Oh, it was just about the sensitivity, the oil fields, basically.
Well, again, I mean, we just don't know what this object was. We don't, it'd be difficult for me to point to a threat or a specific concern such as oil fields when we don't really understand what this object was doing.
I understand. And then I just have one more quick question on the Russian, completely different topic. The Russians have said they're going to cut oil output now. What is the U.S. response to that? And will you reach out to OPEC to ask them to sort of compensate the difference so that the price of oil doesn't escalate at a time when you're just starting to see inflation?
Once again, Mr. Putin's willing to weaponize energy. This move, if it proves to be true, it doesn't come as a big surprise as a reaction to the price cap, and it just shows you the lengths to which he's willing to use resources like energy as a weapon. What the United States will do, have done, continue to do, is work with allies and partners to make sure we can better balance supply and demand and try to meet that need. It's important. We still believe that Mr. Putin not be allowed to profiteer in an inappropriate way off of the oil he puts on the market so that he can then fund his military in the field. I don't have any diplomatic outreach to speak to today. We're going to continue to talk to allies and partners. Certainly OPEC falls in that category, but I don't have any specific conversations to talk about.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you, John. I have two questions. China is claiming ownership of the balloon, and China said that they will take legal actions. Will you send the balloon back to China?
There are no plans to send the debris that we are recovering back to China. We're going to pull it up off the bottom of the ocean, and we're going to learn more about this capability.
Second question, Iran is building a drone factory in Russia, and North Korea is receiving military drones from Russia. How do you view armed cooperation between North Korea, Iran, and Russia?
I can't confirm those specific reports, Jenny, but I was up here not long ago talking about the burgeoning defense relationship between Iran and Russia, which is not only not good for the people of Ukraine, it's not good for the people of the Middle East, because it'll flow both ways, and Russian capabilities could very well end up in Iranian hands. And I would say the same about North Korea. We know, I got up here and showed you pictures, we know that they're providing ammunition to Russia, artillery ammunition specifically. And again, that's not only not good for the people of Ukraine, it's not good for the Korean Peninsula and the region there, that Russia and North Korea could be, again, developing a deeper defense relationship.
Thanks, John. Just a few more on the object. You said it was discovered last night. Was it flying consistently at an altitude of roughly 40,000 feet that entire time?
Roughly, yes.
Were there any sightings that you're aware of by airmen? Civilian aircraft operators? No. And can you, just to nail it down, can you tell us when the president gave the order to shoot it down?
Gave the order to shoot it down this morning. Yep.
Again, just keep following up on the same topic. The speed with which you guys, with which the president apparently decided to shoot it down, having just discovered the first intelligence of it last night, and by the morning he's saying shoot it down. Was there something specific, more specific about the threat than just generally being in the airspace at which, the height at which?
The predominant reason driving the president's decision was the safety of flight issue.
No, I understand it was, but there had, I mean, that's a really big area up there. It's not all that many planes. It's not like it was in the middle of the Northeast corridor or something. Is there no way in which you guys could have said, hey, airplanes, like, steer clear of this area until we know better what this thing is, because we're, in other words, was there some reason why?
The president wasn't willing to take that kind of a risk in time, because this thing did not appear to be self-maneuvering, and therefore at the mercy of prevailing winds. It was much less predictable, and so the president just wasn't willing to take that risk.
Thank you. You mentioned that there were fighter aircraft who were able to determine that it likely was not manned. Were those fighter aircraft able to determine anything else about it from up close that they wouldn't be able to find out otherwise?
They worked really hard to try to get as much information as they could about this object. Given its size, which was much smaller, and the capabilities on the fighter aircraft themselves, the speed at which they were flying, it was difficult for the pilots to glean a whole lot of information. Not like we were able to glean off the balloon, not the other balloon, the balloon. Thank you, Michael. Because we also had several days to track that. So there was a limit to how much they could divine. Also, it was detected at night, and so the first engagement by fighter aircraft late last night was, again, difficult for them. It was a small object, and these are fighter aircraft flying at pretty high speed, and the ability to glean a lot of information was limited, which is why they did another flight earlier this morning to see if we could get more. I mean, they did the best they could, but again, the speed and the conditions up there, as well as the size of the object, made it a little bit more difficult.
Just to confirm, there was a flight last night to
do some surveillance. Yes. Yeah, that's right. There was at least two that I know of. Again, the Pentagon will probably have more detail, but at least two. There was last night, a couple of fighter aircraft surveilled it, tried to glean as much information as we could about what it was, so we had a sense. And then another such flight today, and of course that flight ended up, in a shoot down.
Sorry, just one more question.
Running out of time.
From the White House podium, do you have a message for whoever is responsible for this aircraft, or anyone who may have similar aircraft, about what the White House response is?
I'd rather than sending some sort of message in that way, I would just tell you that we're going to remain vigilant about our airspace. We're going to remain vigilant about the skies over the United States. And as I said earlier, the president takes his obligations to protect our national security interests and and the safety and security of the American people is paramount. And he's always going to decide and act in a way that is commensurate with that duty. That's the real takeaway here.
Okay, way in the back.
Did the U.S. ask Brazil to block Iranian warships from docking in Rio, and if so, why?
We did not ask the Brazilians to block that. Those ships are sanctioned ships specifically, and we don't want to see them dock anywhere in this hemisphere. And we've been very clear about that. But there was no specific ask made of Brazil. That's a sovereign decision that President Lula has to make.
I wanted to follow up on a question I asked you in September. In light of the Chinese spy balloon incident, does this administration consider Chinese land purchases near U.S. military bases a national security threat?
We are always concerned about potential foreign collection near or around our military sites. And you're right, last week is a good example of that. We take that seriously, whether that's terrestrial related or whether it's from the air. And I think I'll just leave it at that.
Would you be working perhaps with Congress to put in place legislation to prevent that kind of ownership?
We are always willing to work with Congress to address our national security interests and threats as best we can.
Corinne. Thanks, Corinne. Thanks, Admiral.
So, thank you, Corinne. Admiral, just real quick, is there a timeline for recovery of this object?
You'd have to talk to the Pentagon. I don't know. Again, guys, this just happened within the last hour and a half, and they're still assessing where this thing landed and the degree to which they can get to it.
And on the Poland visit, I know in the statement that you put out, Karine, it says that the president is going to meet with leaders of the eastern flank NATO countries. Are any other European leaders, NATO leaders, expected to join the president on this trip?
We're still putting the agenda together. The predominant reason to meet with them, the Bucharest Nine, as you call it, is to really talk to those nations who are literally on the eastern flank of the NATO alliance. But I can't rule in or rule out that there may be additional attendees or additional meetings that the president might have.
Thank you very much. Hello, John. Over here.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Back to Lula, if you can remember him. Is there going to be any commitment to the Amazon Fund by the United States during this visit?
I think let's have the visit occur here shortly, and we'll provide you a readout. I don't have anything specific on that.
Okay, thank you. So, John, the U.S. Special Presidential Coordinator for Global and Infrastructure Energy is in Angola. So he met with President Lorenzo. Can you elaborate a little more on this visit?
I don't have any information on that. We'll take the question and see if we can get you a better answer.
Just a quick one on the timeline. Was the president briefed on the object last night when the track first came to the administration's attention?
He was. He was as soon as the Pentagon had enough information to provide him, they did that.
Last question.
Ukraine. Thank you, madam. Thank you, John. As far as Russia's war against Ukraine is concerned, 1 year now, does President believe that when Prime Minister Modi of India told President Putin to stop the war, and this is not the way that this time that war should go like this, and you think there is still time for Prime Minister Modi to stop the war or convince President Putin?
I think there's still time for Mr. Putin to stop the war. I think there's still time for Mr. Putin to stop the war.
Prime Minister Modi can convince?
I'll let the Prime Minister speak to whatever efforts he's willing to undertake. I want to stress it again, Goyle. I mean, certainly the United States would welcome any effort that could lead to an end of hostilities in Ukraine that are in keeping with President Zelensky's objectives and his leadership, his determination of what is acceptable to the Ukraine.